Hi everyone, welcome along. It's Jonathan Corrie from Precursive. For those tuning in, welcome back. And for anyone listening for the first time, I'll share a little bit of an intro to our podcast and what we talk about here. So I love this show because it gives me an opportunity to talk to people about topics in my business life that I'm really interested in the wonderful world of professional services and customer success, in the world of B2B tech. And really over the last 6 months, all of our worlds have been turned upside down, leading to some pretty radical changes in the way that we all live and work. More and more people and companies are looking for new ways of working that can help them manage their work and lives in the context of this remote reality and the different pressures that we face. At Precursive, as many of you will already know, we're working with a range of companies in high tech, SaaS, communications, and professional services. And there's a significant focus really on how companies can deliver more value more quickly to customers, put simply. So oftentimes the responsibility of that post-sale implementation falls to the professional services team. And today I'm delighted to be joined by one of Swansea's finest, Steve Tyler, who's the Director of Professional Services at Mitel, which is an enterprise communications company who provide a range of solutions across SMB, mid-market and enterprise sectors. Happy New Year, Steve. How are you?
Yeah, and to you too, Jonathan. I'm very well, thanks, as well as we can be in these difficult times.
Absolutely. So for those of us that don't know the geographies of the UK, Steve is born and bred in Swansea, but now behind enemy lines in Cardiff, I hear.
That's true, yeah. Born and raised in Swansea, and I've now ended up residing in Cardiff. And as anyone will know, in the football rivalries, that's quite an intense one. So I need to watch what I say.
Is that up there with Man United, Man City, Liverpool, Everton? I would imagine.
On a different level, actually. It's like the Old Firm on steroids, actually.
Brilliant, good stuff. Well, thanks ever so much for joining. You've got a pretty interesting and varied background, nearly a decade at TfL, for example, and now obviously in the wild world of communications. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at the moment at Mitel, and then into your checkered past maybe before that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So my current role is Director of Professional Services for Mitel in what we call the international region, which is the amalgamation of EMEA and Asia Pac. So it's everything from Iceland to New Zealand, although we don't actually have any resources in Iceland or New Zealand, but it covers that geography. Yeah. I've got a team of 60 who work for me directly or indirectly, and they're dotted all around mainland Europe. So we cover the full spectrum of standard and advanced professional services. And by that, I mean everything from consultancy, project and program management, right through to custom software development and integration work. So very high-end PS work. As a business, our main market for those services is through our established partners. And then we've got a portfolio of solutions which cover everything from on-premises, traditional on-premises solutions, hybrid solutions, and then cloud solutions. Mitel, the company, is a great company, been in existence for nearly 50 years, very rich history in telecommunications and now unified communications and contact center. It's a large company, global presence, and we've got a very long list of patents and a great emphasis on innovation. In terms of my history, so I actually born in Swansea, went to Cardiff University to study law. Thought at 17 that I wanted to be a hotshot lawyer.
You'd watched LA4 as a kid, yeah.
Yeah, watched a few films and a few TV series, and thought that it would be all high flying corporate lawyer. So ended up going to do law, and then actually about 6 months into the degree, thought I absolutely hate this. Can't stand it.
Yeah.
But rather than drop out and go and probably face an even worse scenario of going back to live with my parents, thought I'm going to stick this degree out. Graduated, and then I think it was after that I was still in Cardiff, and the best job that I could get was working as a paralegal for a small company in Cardiff. So still hating the profession. So I think it was around about 2005 where I did a sort of Dick Whittington up to London, quit my job, didn't have anywhere to live, and just headed up to the big smoke.
Yeah.
And crashed with my auntie and uncle for a few months. And it was around that time a friend of mine who was working in the BBC had some contract work. So I spent 6 months down at what was Television Centre in Wood Lane near Shepherd's Bush, which I think is now where the shopping centre is. Is it Westfield Shopping Centre?
Yeah.
And then absolutely loved that. So the BBC as an organisation in 2005, I'm sure was a very different place from what it is now. And I probably happily would have stayed in the BBC forever, were it not for the fact that I realised that if you wanted to break into BBC News or you wanted to get a job in front of camera, that was going to take about 10 years, and you needed very, very deep pockets to do that.
Yeah.
So after that, then I was on the tube on the way home one night from Shepherd's Bush back to Cockfosters, which is the end of the Piccadilly line where I was living with my auntie and uncle.
Yeah.
And saw an advertisement for a graduate training scheme for Transport for London. Applied to that, and as I said, spent 10 years at TfL, first of all in a strategy role, and then eventually moved into project and program management, which had a bit of IT transformation.
Yeah.
And had a great 10-year spell with what was a fantastic company.
Huge SAP house, weren't they? Big user of SAP back in the day.
Yeah, massive user of SAP.
Yeah.
And I did I did a massive range of things within TfL, but I sort of gravitated over time towards programs that had more of an IT, technology and transformation slant. At a time when actually, IT projects had a really bad reputation for being hideously over budget and late. So actually, if you were foolish enough to throw yourself into that, it wasn't a bad way to, kind of get yourself up the ladder and get some good experience under your belt.
Yeah, definitely. 15, 20 years ago, that was kind of, they were more expected to fail than succeed, weren't they? I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So then as the story goes, I think for a lot of people who migrated to London that were not from London, I met my wife. We had our first child, and then all of a sudden London wasn't necessarily the best place to live. And so we started looking for somewhere to live outside. And eventually, after some debate about whether to go up north or whether to go back to Wales, I won, and we ended up back in Wales, settled in Cardiff.
So that means you met a northerner in London. Is that correct? If I
correct, yeah.
Okay. All right. So
I met a northerner in London outside Clapham Common tube station at 2:00 in the morning. And
that'll do it. That'll do it. That's where romance is born, in Clapham, to be honest with you, Steve. So
it's, yeah.
Great intro. Well, brilliant to have you on the show. I mean, I think there's that type of experience, though. I think it's really interesting because you've seen the old world, right? You've seen the old world of projects and infrastructure projects and IT projects where, people were popping champagne corks if they actually went live or not. Do you know what I mean? Versus the world that we're living in today where, the expectations of customers when they're buying software or communications products is completely different, right? In terms of how they want to realize value from their investment and the time over which that happens. So I think it's super interesting the background there. So we've talked in this podcast before about what we started calling I was telling you when we caught up in the week, right? This new remote reality, as we were calling it, and now it's just reality, right? Everything is remote. But I think I remain fascinated by, simply the fact, if you take what you're doing, right, you got a team of 60 based all around the world, serving customers over a huge geography, working with a range of products, some on premise, some hybrid, some cloud, via a partner network, right? And that all being coordinated now virtually. And it's amazing, really, when you think about it, that's the modern world that we're working in. So talk to us a little bit about how you've had to adapt to this remote working in last year and you see it proceeding in this year. And what are some of the ways that you and your team have adapted your approach to work in this environment?
Yeah, sure. And we, in Mitel, we're very fortunate in that we went into the pandemic last March in very good shape in terms of having a kind of virtual and remote team anyway, and all of the technology. So obviously that's what we do as a business. So we had all of the right tool set. And actually, in the couple of years prior to March, we had one kind of senior sales and services leader who's actually now departed, but was absolutely a real driver of video uptake. So when he came into the business in around 2017, 2018, I wouldn't say at that point that people were largely using video as the primary tool for doing business. They were largely still using audio conferences. And he was a big kind of advocate of that. So he almost transitioned the business to using video exclusively as opposed to audio calls. So that was a good preparation. And then we also, funnily enough, had the Great Fire of Caldicot in the UK, which is our UK head office, as we call it, in 2019, where we had an innocuous laptop fire within the support team that somehow mushroomed into a slightly larger event. And it just meant that by virtue of that, we had to implement our disaster recovery plan and push everyone in 2019 out to a 100% remote working.
Okay, all right, right.
So it just meant that we'd going into March 2020, we'd already had the tool set, and we had the practice.
Fire.
The fire. No one was injured in the fire, and everyone got used to setting up their home office and having the right broadband connections and security and firewalls and everything that I think a lot of businesses then struggled with when March came around. Very, very well placed.
Here comes my support staff now. Everyone, Frank, my son's on the podcast. So we're back on recording live. So that was, everyone's met Frank before a few times on this podcast. We've had babies in the podcast crawling around in the background, Steve. It was a good one. We had a friend of mine, Guy, who works at Shell, and he was chatting away and his baby went past in the background. And then you saw his wife crawl past in the background. We're like, it's not that formal. So there we go. Yeah. Cool. So, so going back to it. So basically had a fire, was prepped, ready to go. But what's changed in terms of the dynamics of like your delivery, like professional services delivery to your customers now?
Yeah. And that's, so I think in two senses, things have changed. The one thing that's been removed, which I think was always beneficial that we've had to adapt to, is on a normal professional services engagement, a slightly larger engagement, you would have had a mix of on-site consultancy or project management or engineering, and you would have had an opportunity to, maybe if it was initially, to go and have a workshop, gather requirements, meet people from that customer organization, and just benefit from immersing yourself in their surroundings for a couple of days and meeting lots and lots of different people, maybe even, now I know it sounds a bit cliched, but even perhaps going out for dinner with them in the evening and just getting to know them on a more personal basis, a little bit of rapport building up. So what the pandemic just took all of that away. And I think it's just meant that as a team, we've had to focus on how do we deliver those engagements in a slightly different way. And I think one of the things we've had to do is realize that perhaps before you would have covered a lot of ground in a 7-hour workshop split into 2 sessions. Now you've got to maybe chunk it down and break it up a little bit.
Yep.
So deliver it in a slightly different way. And then also what we had to do with the teams is actually appraise who is comfortable from a skill set perspective in being able to do a consultancy engagement 100% via video. As opposed to those who perhaps needed a bit more support. But thankfully, we've seen exactly the same thing on the customer side. Everyone's going through the same challenges of some people who have naturally really adapted to the new ways of working, and then others who are still clamoring to be in front of the customer in a traditional face-to-face way. So other things that sometimes when you're in the room and you can pan around and gauge everyone's just kind of emotional cues and physical cues, you kind of miss a lot of that as well. So I think on the consultancy side, it's needed a slightly different approach. But on the kind of implementation and engineering side at a configuration level, I don't think it's been a radical change for us.
Right.
I think we were well set up before with good remote access into customer systems, and it's been really a continuation of what we've been doing over the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's true. You can't notice that person in a workshop frowning in the corner, right? And pick that up and say, hey, so and so, it seems like you've got something on your mind that that they bottle up. If people are on video calls, might have the camera off, for example, or unwilling to perhaps feel the need to speak up. And how do you see the like remote delivery evolving in the future? Because do you see that there's some benefits that will remain? Like how do you see it evolving in the future?
Yeah, I think I suppose one of the most interesting things about the last 10 months is that, say, for example, we as an organization had taken the decision for us to go 100% remote,
Yep.
but yet lots of other businesses that we dealt with hadn't. I think that would have presented more challenges than what we've had, which is almost actually a brilliantly level playing field of everyone being in the same position.
Yep.
So I think the only direction that it will go in, because at the minute it's 100% remote for everyone, I think in the end it will settle back on more of a balance between delivering those services remotely and probably a lot of customers having a massive appetite once things return to back to some kind of normal to say it would be great to get around the table again and and reconvene. And I think that would be no different in the workplace for us, that when we've done lots of staff surveys, everyone now pretty much says the same thing, which is I really like the flexibility of delivering my work remotely and doing things remotely, but please don't fully take away the ability to get together with teams or with customers and have some face-to-face. So I'm hopeful that it will return to that, and I think it will. But I think it will depend on the type of service you offer. I think for the higher end advanced services, you'll still see a mix. I think for the lower end kind of engineering work, I think we're just now ingrained in a pattern of that will be done kind of remotely from anywhere in the world, particularly for cloud solutions. And that's another thing which we've come to realize, that I think a lot of customers have changed almost kind of their policies or procedures or ways of working, that they're now far more accepting of something being delivered from someone who's perhaps remotely logging on from somewhere else in the world, whereas they might have had some more reservations about that type of thing a year ago. So in that sense, it's progress.
Yeah, it's a common thread amongst people that I talk to about this, which is like, we appreciated the opportunity in person to be able to go in and meet people, shake people's hands, see the offices that our customers worked in, see the posters on the wall, or some of the mission statements, or some of the funny things that people have in their offices, and you get to there's that, like you say, that rapport that builds up. And I think the other dynamic is it's quite difficult to, in my opinion, run complex like solution architecture conversations virtually. It's not impossible at all. People are doing it, right? But it's not, I don't think it's as fun as it was, right? You get in a workshop, you've got space. Yeah, some of the time, some of those tiny meeting rooms where you try to cram 20 people around a table that fits 4 can be awkward. But I think some of those sessions are much harder to deliver like virtually, because, and again, you've got to space them up, right? Because it's difficult for people to sit around a screen for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. So I think you're right. Those high velocity is what we call them, like those high velocity, maybe those more transactional types of services engagements. I can't see anyone going back to an in-person delivery for that kind of stuff. With respect to, so how many years have you now worked in professional services and communications? Like nearly 7?
Yeah, it's actually 6. Yeah, 6 this year.
6 this year, right? So how would you describe the role and the importance of professional services in the world of communications?
I think in some categories of professional services, absolutely nothing has changed over the last few years, irrespective of the technology. So I'll give you an example: the need for brilliant project and program management.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter whether that's an on-premises deployment or a cloud deployment, or if it's on-site or if it's remote. That need is strong and is there. I just think that maybe the dynamics have changed, certainly in our sector, perhaps from the customer expectation side of things. That I think customers probably expect to be able to do more themselves. So perhaps at the lower end of kind of implementation and configuration, they either expect to be able to do it themselves or to have a portal where they can go in and for more things to be automated. So I think the change that I've seen is that in actual fact, you've got to take the professional services offerings kind of higher up the value chain. It's got to be more advanced, and you've got to be offering things which customers and our partners genuinely look at and think, we can't do that ourselves, or we don't have the coverage or the capability, and therefore we need to call on those professional services. And I think that's the change. And it's probably no different to us in our personal lives, that we feel very comfortable now sort of going on to Google and trying to troubleshoot, well, maybe in the IT space, maybe not everyone else, trying to troubleshoot our own problems and configure as much of things as we can ourselves. And just customers, they want to do the same. And if they've employed a couple of clever technical people, they often, the conversation often starts off by saying, right, how much of this can we do ourselves? We've got so and so, they're really competent. And that's the challenge for the industry. I think if you're selling professional services, you've really got to focus hard on what are the things that you can offer, which they definitely cannot do themselves and they need from you.
Right. Okay. So if I just play that, that's interesting. A couple of key things, well, three key things there, right? One, that, ground zero of having great project management capability is still a prerequisite, probably more so now, right, in a remote world. Two, customers expecting to do more on their own, which I completely see as well in our space and amongst our customers. You guys being one of them, right? Actually, when you deployed one of Precursive's products, trying to think here, yeah, it was deployed by Mitel, right? So it was all Mitel staff deploying it, one of our products into Salesforce. So yeah, completely see that. It's interesting, this advancement piece. Okay, so if we just unpack that a little bit, like this more advanced professional services, is that advancement driven by the complexity or value of the product, or is it services propositions and service wrappers that need to advance, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think it's reflective of the type of engagements that you get. And I'll give you an example that I think if you were to go back 10, 15 years in this space, you had lots of different products and solutions that were quite segmented from one another, and they each had their own individual fiefdoms of skill, and you kind of attached service wrappers to those things.
Yep.
Whereas now, almost every engagement starts off in a requirements gathering session with a customer saying, this is what we want. And also, you need to be mindful of, we've got this, we've got that. This is our CRM. We use this for, kind of back-end integrations, this for compute. And actually, the overarching architecture and things that you need to integrate your product or your solution into, it is sometimes a bewildering array of things. So they almost drive the need for complexity. And I think then you need to meet them with having the skill set and capability that kind of delivers what they need. So quite often for us now in Mitel, we've got a very strong contact center proposition, and our customers really understand our contact center. So quite often the main advanced services sell is, we've got the capabilities for you to be able to hook that into Microsoft Dynamics, or you can hook that into Salesforce.com, or we're using ServiceNow and we'd like to pop the Mitel kind of call capabilities out of ServiceNow. Can we do that? And it's just about us having packages that we can say, absolutely, yes, we can. And this is how much it will cost, and this is how long it will take.
Because that was one of the things that when we've been talking in the past, it was almost, you're doing a lot of stuff in and around software now as well, right? As much as your traditional communications products. So that world of software and communications, and as you say, integrating into Salesforce or Microsoft and things like that, does by the very fact that there are all these different products, I guess, throws up a range of complexities around skills, for example. So it sounds like in your world, like skills and understanding the knowledge of people, or continually developing the knowledge of people, is really important as well, I would have thought. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's the good thing and the exciting thing for my team is that quite often when we're pitching for, for an overarching solution, albeit the PS element of it may not be the biggest part of the overall piece, quite often it's the PS, the ability to do the PS element that pulls through the whole deal. Because in actual fact, it boils down to we all know the section 10 of the requirements, which says we need to be able to do these 5 things, and they're must-haves. And if you don't select must-have, you're out. And so quite often it's my team that can come in there and fill those gaps.
Yeah.
So it's exciting in that sense that the 5,000 or 10,000 part of the overall deal is the thing that wins you the business.
So answer me this then. So a lot of what we're talking about now as a business, both internally with our customers, right, is this idea that no one's buying software or communications products for the sake of buying the products, right? They want to achieve an outcome, and that outcome being a change in their business, whether that's growth, cost savings, compliance, engaging with their customers better. So in your world, give us some examples of like, what are some of the outcomes that your customers are looking to achieve from Mitel solutions?
From Mitel Solutions, I mean, again, it's I think a change in emphasis for us in the way that we position our solutions. That we've gone from being a hardware centric to a mixture of hardware and software centric, and now really a solution centric business. Talking to our customers in the language of customer experience, not talking to them in the language of we'll sell you a contact center or we'll sell you some devices. So the conversation and the outcome is the conversation with the customer is, what problems are you trying to cure within your business, and how do they translate then into a better customer experience for your customers, and how can we fill those gaps? And not being wedded to any one particular part of how the solution does that, but just listening to what they're trying to solve, and then being really creative about how our products can do that, and obviously how our PS and services can help to bring it all together. And so, for example, in the contact center space, a company may not yet have they may have an inbound contact center, but they might not yet have an outbound function. They might at some point in the future want to do some kind of demand generation or outbound campaign, but yet they're not there yet. And it's about saying, well, again, we've got the capability to do that. You can build that onto the product. And it's really, from a consultancy standpoint, trying to understand the journey that they're going on, where they want to take the business, and how they can provide the best possible customer experience for their customers. And that's getting into that sort of narrative with them, as opposed to shuffling in there with a bag of products and different things that we can sell them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that framework around like just the. It's interesting that you in a communications company say like it's a conversation about how you want to go from here to here, and the impact that has on customer experience is very simple. But I guess that's the thread that sort of like goes through a lot of your conversations with clients, is ultimately that outcome being on customer experience, how that allows your customers to work better with their customers, right? And builds their brand, builds loyalty, customer loyalty, recurring revenues, all of these types of things, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So last bit that would like to talk about and get your thoughts on. So prior to helping set up Precursive, I worked for a company called CEB, and CEB was a research organization. and an advisory company that got bought out by Gartner a number of years ago. And they had some great frameworks around like the core capabilities that you find within different business functions. So they had this thing called the anatomy of like a world-class sales organization, or a world-class contact center organization, or world-class procurement organization. So on that theme, that's something that I've been really interested in finding out about. What are some of the common denominators that are seen across like great professional services teams and organizations? So I want to talk a little bit about that now with you. So in your experience, what do you see as some of the key components for world-class professional services capabilities? We've talked about a few of them already, but
yeah, world class. I think for me it is it's a combination of having all of the kind of great foundations of that PS organization. So obviously, Jonathan, from your world, you need a high functioning and effective PSA tool underpinned within the business, and you need to have all of the things that allow you to manage the business around resource management, understanding the kind of skills that you need to have within the business, all of the documentation, all of the templates, all of the processes. So all of those things, I think, are crucially important. But I think, let's say they're a given. I think the majority of mature PS organizations understand that. And most customers that we work with have a pretty good handle on that as well. For me personally, and something which we focus a lot on within Mitel, and I do with my team, I think what makes a PS organization world class is it truly is the behaviors and the values and the way that your people go about delivering those services, and making sure that you are constantly and consistently sort of benchmarking and checking that that's still in place. And I see that as almost as a two-way thing. It's constantly doing that with your partners and your customers, and seeking their feedback and whether they're happy with the services that you're deploying, and equally doing the same with your own employees, because you need them to be happy and content deploying the right behaviors, and for your customers to be happy. And I think those are the things which, for me, if you get them right and you arm your people with the right tools and the right processes, which you should be able to do, if you can get the behaviors and the skills right as well, put that together, and it's a powerful combination.
If you don't mind, then in your world, tell us a little bit about some of those behaviors or values that you guys really focus on, if you don't mind, if you're able to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's I think it's about and this is why, coming back to the challenge before around not meeting people face to face, we focus on one of the key things is building rapport with customers at the outset of a project. So quite in the past, I used to find that it was quite a sort of almost a what's the word, quite a simple handoff, if you like, from sales to service, and then people would pick up the baton and just start running with something. Quite often forget the need to build up strong relationships with customers at the outset. So really work very hard on that before you get into the nitty gritty of delivery, and then tackling some of the problems that you often come up against in an IT project. And then from the sort of behaviors and value side of things, really saying to our staff, you need to be direct rather than indirect. You need to have strong accountability. You need to have kind of energy and purpose. You need to be fair and consistent and reasonable with people. So it's really geared towards more how you behave when you deliver that project or you deliver that consultancy.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. It's something that I have talked to companies a lot about, and I've actually mentioned it on this show to a couple of people around that. Do services organizations take into account, or do delivery teams in general take into account the sales cycle time, right, prior to closing a deal? So for example, if a company has gone through a 6-9 month sales cycle, the level of like excitement and or need to get on with it is very high at that point in time when that deal is finalized, when that contract is signed. And I don't think that's always taken into account by organizations, because that's the most excited that the customer's going to be. They would like to get your product tomorrow if they've been through that length of time. The layer into that, I think, that you brought to it is that rapport element, right? If you're a good professional salesperson, you're a nice person, you would have built up a strong relationship with a potential client who's become a customer, who may, in some instances, I've seen people have become friends that way, right? I know with some of my former clients. And yet you've then got that transition into services, who, as you say, are picking up that baton. And it would be, I think there is sometimes this expectation, is like, right, let's get going. But in reality, you do have to build up that rapport again, not rebuild that trust, but build it to a certain level where your advice is being, taken in the right way, for example. So I think that's actually really interesting. Do you feel like there are some ways beyond personal relationships to build rapport in professional services, e.g., expertise, right? I mean, if you are a truly a world-class expert and advisor, that trust that I'm gonna have in you is going to be there. Are there some things that you believe in terms of building rapport quickly?
Yeah, I think that's, again, that was probably in my list of my category of givens, that, in terms of world class. And one thing we work very hard on is to make sure that our teams are accredited right to the very highest level of the product set. So that's the things that they're consulting on or delivering. Mm-hmm. So once you've got that, I think if you can match the kind of high accreditation and the expertise with a consultant or a project manager or an engineer who's well-rounded and sort of demonstrates the right behaviors, for me, when you put those two things together, it works very well. But another thing which we focus on with the teams is, rather than seeing that traditional sales versus services kind of almost butting heads or locking horns at times,
disconnect.
Yeah, exactly. The hospital pass from the the salesperson who's done a runner on to the next thing. Over the last 5 years, we've done a lot of work on bringing those two worlds together, and actually, working with our services team to try and understand the world of sales and vice versa. The one thing we have as almost a principle is an understanding in the services team that, in the sales world, it's unlikely that the word no or it can't be done will ever have been used. And we need to understand that, and let's not rail against it. Let's almost have that as a underlying ethos within our team, that when there's complexity or there's challenges, no is a last resort, and we should be looking at every single way we can unpick an issue or get over a hurdle. And so again, it just becomes almost I think the most successful PS people have got the right way of doing things. They don't necessarily follow the tried and tested methodologies or subscribe to a particular way of doing things. And they just have a way of getting things done in the right way, which sort of excites a customer and brings a customer or partner back time and time again. And it's not just about rapport and talking about football or understand what they're doing on the weekend. It's just about expertise and respect for that individual.
Yeah, they've delivered outcomes and value of some description, but there's also a way that they've done that, right? Like I think that also that's maybe, that'll be something I think I might explore in the future, which is like, if you're you could be dealing with an absolute expert in their field, but if they're a complete dickhead about it, then, to be honest with you, you might not want to buy from that organization again, right? Final thing then, and I really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you ever so much for taking the time, and clearly you've thought about some of the things that we were going to talk about as well, which is great. Data in the world of professional services is very important, because kind of the math of services should be simple, right? But it's not in reality, right? So there's a lot of complexity there, and therefore data and metrics and KPIs are very, very important to professional services leaders like yourself. So tell me a little bit about what are some of the metrics that matter in your world, and how do you use these types of KPIs to help you manage and grow the business?
Yeah, so I think from a metric standpoint, I would say we've got a lot of the traditional things that you would expect to see within a PS organization. So we look at, the financials and the commercials around the project delivery. Is it on time? Is it on budget? Is a particular project experiencing a significant level of change, and therefore it's a red flag? Obviously, from a resources standpoint, looking at utilization, billable utilization, and trying to understand if there's perhaps things are a bit uneven across the group. So using that to kind of almost do sort of work allocation.
Workload equality, as we call it.
Yeah, workload equality, making sure that one person is overloaded. And I think, even though we certainly, I'm the first one to confess that there's certainly improvements that we can make within our business, as anyone can, in terms of measuring those metrics. We can certainly call them off and look at those. And then I think combining those with, again, the things that will probably change the game is looking at partner satisfaction and customer satisfaction really closely, doing it to each engagement, for each engagement rather, but also doing it not necessarily in a formal way, sending someone a survey, and if they fill it out, great, and if they don't, you move on. But actually, again, maybe it's a behavior, actually seeking direct feedback from someone and picking up the phone and asking someone, how did we do? And tracking that, as well as in the software as a service industry, churn, looking at churn of customers. So are we losing customers, or are contracts going down in value? And then trying to strike at the heart of that to understand why. So those are the things that we routinely measure, as well as I said, our employee satisfaction. So for me, the ultimate conundrum is if you've got brilliant revenue and partner satisfaction is high, and your team are disgruntled and unhappy, that is not going to take you to a growth position.
No.
By contrast, if you're brilliant employee satisfaction, low attrition, and you're losing customers and contracts right, left, and center, and people are unhappy with the outcomes, that's never going to take you to a growth position either. So you've got to try and knit those two things together and work really hard on getting the high performing, happy team, and then try to marry that up with the really happy, sort of consistent orders coming in from your partners. And I think that's the way I see metrics. It's just like a health check. It's not one metric. It might be 10 different things. And you look at them all, and then it becomes a judgment call as a leader to say, right, where do I need to focus? Which one of these things is something which is a red flag to me, and I need to look at, whether that's a look at for the team, or look at for an individual, or pick up the phone and speak to a customer. Say, you're talking of leaving us, or the value of the contract is dropping, or you're unhappy. What was the reason for that? And sometimes I'm amazed by how few times some people do that, or that they don't have the confidence to pick up the phone and speak to someone and say, how did I do? Or how are we doing? And I've got thick skin and I can take it. So just let me know.
Yeah. It's interesting. I find it fascinating that PS organizations are always looking to figure out this formula for success, where they're balancing that trifecta, or however many different factors it is around, like the inward metrics and KPIs versus what's happening with the customer. And it is a paradox, right? It's that professional services paradox where, I don't think you can drive at scale success if you don't have a happy and productive team. I just don't think I don't think it happens. The numbers might be there, but they won't be there for long, because you churn your people and then you'll start missing on delivery, and then it's gone like that. And so you see a lot of services organizations that have variability in performance, primarily driven by the fact that they kind of overwork the team that drives up revenue, services revenue potentially, certainly, and then it peters off as people get burnt out, leave, et cetera. So I think balancing that understanding of, like, fundamentally you have to be people first to be customer centric. You can't fake it. You can't pretend to care about your staff and make sure that they're happy and productive and skilled and all of these things, and then and magically expect them then to deliver all that they need to deliver, yet at the same time maybe not pay them enough, or overutilize them, or whatever it is. So no, I think that's the holy grail, right, of services, in my opinion. Well, a fascinating conversation. So thank you ever so much for joining. I mean, a number of key takeaways, I think. One, if you want to prep for a pandemic, have a fire the year before. We've not heard that one before. I think a few key takeaways. The shift, which I'm definitely seeing elsewhere, which is this customer expectations changing about their involvement, and customers wanting to get more involved. And therefore, I think there is this, there's an increased level of them wanting visibility into what they need to do and when, right? Because then they're almost a part of your team then, right? In a sense, or certainly the delivery mechanism, which is very interesting. I really love the way that you described the evolution of that communication space of hardware centric into hardware and software into solutions into customer centricity. I think and customer experience. I think that's very interesting. And I think having that framework for a services organization about what are the conversations that we need to be having to drive customer experience at scale was also interesting. And then the fact that, I think you rightly highlight that things like resource management and capacity planning and documentation and having good processes is really table stakes. So if, as a professional services organizations, there are big problems in those processes or those ways of working, you are not world-class, because those are table stakes for a services organization. So no, thank you ever so much, Steve. Do appreciate it. And thanks all those for tuning in to this episode. So for more insight and content, go to precursive.com. And if you want, and you can do this as well, Steve, of course, subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening on to, whether it's Spotify or on our website. Give us a rating or review, and tell friends and family, spread the word. So thanks ever so much, Steve.
No problem, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, brilliant. All the best, and a happy new year once again.
Cheers.
Cheers.